So not far outside the town of Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, something special has been happening for over 20 years that few in the sports world know about. Messiah College, a small Division III school, has produced arguably the most dominant collegiate sports team in America in the last 2 decades. From 2000 to 2010, the men and women's team had a combined record of 472 wins, 31 losses, and 20 ties. They won 11 national titles during that time period. They had unbeaten streaks that lasted seasons, not just games. In the last decade alone, they still have won 6 more national championships to bring their program to 17 national titles. But what's probably most impressive about them is how they have done it. Their culture isn't just producing national championships, but it's creating an experience that transforms lives and is arguably the best soccer team in the nation to play for. Now, over the next 3 episodes of the Coaching Culture Podcast, we're going to dive deep into what has led to their success on the field and the transformations off the field. If you're a first-time listener to the podcast, welcome. My name is JP Nurbin. I'm joined by my friend and co-host Nate Sanderson. The next 3 episodes, we're also joined by 2 special guests, Dr. Mike Zigarelli, who's a professor of leadership and strategy at Messiah College. Also, he's the author of the book, The Messiah Method, about Messiah's soccer program. We're also going to welcome Coach Dave Brandt on the podcast. He was Messiah's men's coach from 1997 to 2008. He coached at Navy after that, Pittsburgh, and now he's at Hope College in Michigan. In each of these episodes, we're going to share parts of our conversation with both Mike and Dave as we kind of explore lessons from the book and the team culture from the outsider's perspective and the architect's perspective, Dave Brandt. But we'll start here with Mike Zigarelli.
Well, Mike, we're happy to have you with us on the podcast here today as the author of the book about Messiah's incredible soccer success over decades in both the men's and women's program. And I'd like to just kind of start with this question. Where did the genesis for the book come from for you as kind of the observer at the college? What was it that kind of inspired you to want to tell this story?
Yeah, I arrived at Messiah in 2008, which ironically enough was Dave Brandt's last year at Messiah, but learned about this soccer program. Wasn't real familiar with it beforehand, but I saw the success both on the men's and women's side. And as somebody who is a researcher of leadership and organizational performance, I thought, wow, that is one fantastic story. Surely this story must have been told somewhere. And looking for that, it was told here and there in kind of sound bites and sort of a shallow, superficial way. You know, here's what seems to be working at Messiah. Maybe you can do this too. But I mean, nothing real substantive, nothing real helpful. And so I went into Dave Brandt's office and I said, hey, has anybody written this down? Am I just missing this? And he said, no, I don't think so. And so we talked about the possibility of going further with it. And that was the origin. It was just, this is a great story to tell, and it's one from which many people can learn well beyond athletics, well beyond soccer, well beyond athletics. It's a story about team performance, organizational performance, and how you achieve that not just once and not just twice, but year after year after year. I mean, it's been 20 years now, 25 years of remarkable success from both of these programs. And I think that's maybe the centerpiece of the story. Isn't how you get there 1 or 2 times, but how you can sustain that dynasty type success.
So obviously the book talks about the 7 disciplines within the program that you observed, but I'm just curious, years after writing the book, what were probably some of the main threads that still stick with you today?
Well, all these 7 disciplines, which are common to both the men's side and the women's side. And I don't think either side expressed it quite that way. Here are the 7 things we do. I think Dave had maybe a pyramid like John Wooden's of 15 things, and Scott Fry on the women's side had his several things. And there were these 7 common threads that we articulated through this research. But as far as what's had staying power, what really has lasted, for me personally, it was probably the intentionality behind all of this, the fact that the leaders here were controlling, orchestrating pretty much everything We're thinking about this all the time. We're working so hard all the time. And really it's that maybe the fact that they, as leaders, believed they had all the power they needed to do whatever they wanted to do, to aspire to this lofty, astronomically high vision that they had. They had all the power they needed. They had a paltry resource budget. They had, not much of a coaching staff, although good people, but very limited number of people. But at the same time, it was, I'm not going to make any excuses here. If there's something not going right on your team, it's your fault, was the basic philosophy that Dave had and carried over to Scott Fry on the women's side. And so I think that's something that's carried over for me. It's just in my life, in my work, and in my leadership, it's basically execution without excuses. Don't point anyplace else. If things aren't going right, look in the mirror first and then fix it.
And you say in the book, talking about the 7 disciplines, of the program, you say to orchestrate any one of them with consistency requires effort and expertise. To orchestrate all of them requires a master conductor. And that's really stuck with me. And I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit to that.
Sure. I mean, there are some coaches out there who are expert trainers. They can build a great training session. They're really good at fitness, really good at the fundamentals, not that great at culture building, maybe not that great at the recruiting piece. And so they try to bring somebody else alongside to do the recruiting or whatever. There are other coaches who might be good at those latter pieces, but they just don't have the time or just don't make the time to be intentional and to really fix everything that's broken and to diagnose all the problems and so on. I mean, others are just, they show up on game day and they do their off the cuff talk, and then they figure, let's get out there and do what we're trained to do. They don't really choreograph game day the way these coaches do. So what I'm talking about is as a master conductor, and I don't know if that's a metaphor that would work for any of the coaches there. I'm not sure any of them would describe themselves that way, but it's really a number of things going on simultaneously, just like an orchestra, right? And you need to orchestrate them. You need to coordinate them in such a way that they're all in harmony, all working hard together, and all operating synergistically. So that's why I use the metaphor.
So as we've been talking about intentionality as a leader with Mike, it makes sense to share some of Dave's perspective on how important intentionality and vision are as a leader. So taking a break from our conversation with Mike, here's the first part of our conversation with Dave.
All right, Dave. Well, it's great to have you with us here on the podcast here today. And I want to kind of get started with maybe just a little bit of your perspective, starting with your experience at Messiah. So I know a lot of our listeners, with quite a few basketball coaches and coaches from other sports other than soccer that may not be familiar with your story or with the Messiah Method, the book, and all the success that they've had there. So I'm just curious, you played there and then got the opportunity to coach there for a number of years. When you look back at your time at Messiah, what made that a special and unique experience for you?
Well, sure. I mean, so I actually grew up in New England, and moved to the Messiah area when I was 14 years old. And nobody would know this, but I actually moved because my dad was in higher education. So he was a physics prof in New England. That's where I grew up, and became academic dean at Messiah, like when I was 14 years old. And so I'm a ninth grader or whatever. But what made it special? Well, I mean, honestly, I climbed the rungs there. I was literally a fan of the team in high school, like very much so. Sort of lived and died with them, knew some of the guys. It was great. I wouldn't say it was a foregone conclusion that I was absolutely going to go there. I looked at a couple other schools, but I did end up going there. And so, okay, I played there and just had a awesome, passionate playing experience. And then I think the other part of the story is, I was a business major. And when I was a senior at Messiah, especially when my fall senior season was over, I just thought I'd, get a job like you're supposed to do and like everybody else. Somehow it turned, and the head coach there who I had played for, they needed a JV coach / third assistant. I decided to, he wanted me considered. I decided to start work on my master's and do that. So I just sort of fell into coaching. It was not the plan. So I was 3 years JV coach, 9 years varsity assistant after that. So that's 12 years as an assistant, and finally took over in 1997. and then was head coach 12 years. And kind of that was sort of the good to great transformation. It was a good program. We were always, sort of quote unquote good. But, if you look back, what made it special, I was literally a fan of the team. I played there. I was third assistant, second assistant, first assistant, and eventually head coach. And so, it's my alma mater, and obviously, a place in a program that was close to me and really important.
So there's a lot of books out there about team cultures, organizations that are great, and we've read those books, The Cubs Way, Barcelona Way. I mean, there's lots of them out there, but I think the Messiah Method is a really special book for me. It's honestly up there as far as one of my favorites. And as you read the book and you go through these 7 disciplines, I have to say they're inspiring. They're really practical. There's a lot to take away from it. But at a certain point, it becomes a little bit overwhelming. Zigarelli actually says in the book to orchestrate any one of them with consistency requires effort and expertise. To orchestrate all of them requires a master conductor. And when I read that line in the book, I was kind of like, whoa, overwhelmed. So my question for you is, how were you able to execute those 7 disciplines with consistency over time?
So a couple disclaimers here, and hope not to just ruin the podcast right on the second question. And I will answer the question. So it's interesting. I mean, Mike came to Messiah later in my tenure. So Mike Zigarelli, who wrote this book, Mike came later in my tenure as head coach at Messiah. So we were, really rolling by the time he got there. And interestingly, I believe it was my last fall there, and I met Mike for the first time. And he made, we made an appointment to just sit down and talk. And he said, has anybody ever written this up? I'm like, written what up? He said, well, what's going on in the soccer program at Messiah? I said, no, I guess not. I mean, by that time I was doing a fair bit of speaking, but mostly locally, just because we'd been successful. And you know how it is. If somebody's successful, I mean, people want to know the secret, why, what's in the water, et cetera. So, I had done that, but nothing at any sort of large scale. And so we actually, I don't think, if memory serves, talked again until I left Messiah at the end of 2008 for the Naval Academy. We regrouped at Navy when the book became a reality and spent a significant amount of time together just talking, as he sort of interviewed me and researched for the book. But the disclaimer is, I don't mean this to sound bad at all. I actually have not sat down and read the book. So I would be super hard pressed to say what the 7 disciplines are, which sounds terrible, I know. But right, like I said, disclaimer and honest statement. But I'm familiar with it. I mean, I've looked at it. Obviously, I get it, and I think, more so. Well, I didn't write it. I mean, I lived it, and so okay, there it is. I'm just a really big culture guy, and it's interesting to me that you said what you did. This sounds big. It sounds complex. It sounds like a lot, and in some ways it is. And I think, I view coaching to me as leadership, and culture creation requires leadership. And I have some really specific thoughts on that we can get into or not. But while it's big, I think at the same time, if you approach leadership in the right way, some of it just sort of follows or flows, if that makes sense. And so in some ways, I would say, it's not complicated. I mean, look, leadership is an art. Culture creation is an art. It's not a science. It's not a list of things. So it requires ebb and flow. It's relational. It's vulnerable. It's risky. It requires courage. I mean, I don't think I'm telling you or anybody listening things that they don't know. So I think it's hard, but if you approach it with honesty, transparency, and I just think sort of a daring to be naive and idealistic, then I think some of this stuff just flows and falls into place. I mean, that's a super broad question that you asked, so I'm not sure when to stop, and I won't go for 45 minutes here, but it's always been my contention that leadership, true leadership, starts with one thing, and that's vision. Now, let me go for just another minute on that, and then I promise to come up for air. I think this is really important because I define vision as knowing what you want it to look like beyond the bottom line. Like as coaches, we all know one thing: we want to win. That's not vision. That's a result. It's like profit in business. So I want to win. Everybody wants to win. It's not that I don't want to win, but it's not enough. There has to be vision. And in my experience, this is where organizations fail. it's either a stated vision that has no relevance at all, and everybody knows that, and it's soon just sort of like a shrug of the shoulders, or there isn't a vision, like we're here to win, period. And that's fine. I mean, I want to win, like I said, but for me, it's not enough. So I just had what I would call a very idealistic vision. I wanted things to be just so. I wanted to coach the team that I would want to play on. I wanted things to be great. I essentially wanted Camelot in a soccer program, and I won't tell it now, but I have a little bit of a funny story about how this all started when I ran into a faculty member and she asked me, so what are the big plans? I stood there and I told her the big plans. And as I look back on it, it was so idealistic, like pie in the sky, like perfect, like come on. But, the reality is a lot of it came true. Maybe not perfect, obviously, but I'll sit here and define things for you. I have a definition for idealism. I think it's important. I'm a huge fan of idealism. And I think leadership starts there. And I encourage, recommend an idealistic vision and to go after it. So my definition for idealism, I think it's very simple. I think it's logical. I think it's true. It's nothing more than a commitment to the way things ought to be, right? We all want something to be, if we say that this is ideal, it means, hey, it's great. It's just how I want it. And all that really takes is commitment. So, I tell people there's one big word in that definition, and that's commitment. Commitment's a big word. But if you are committed to the way things ought to be and are transparent, honest, willing to, again, risk, be vulnerable, to dare, it's amazing how these things just sort of fall into place and the complication goes. And in the end, that vision at Messiah and wherever I've been has been the measure of what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong, what we do and what we don't do. And that tends to simplify things. So a little bit of a long answer, and I apologize, but hoping that helps.
No, that's great. And, the Zigarelli shares, what your vision was at Messiah, which was, we're going to be the best place in the country to play college soccer. And I don't know if that was your vision statement, but
yeah,
that
it
really
was actually, that's accurate.
Yeah, and I love that, the best place to play, soccer, in the country. I think that was an incredible. I love sharing that vision statement with so many coaches. I think it's inspired a lot of other people to be a little bit more, idealistic. My question then is really following that up, when it comes to, you've got a vision. And I think Zigarelli is really talking about having certain disciplines, certain tools or strategies that you're consistently using within your culture to drive that and to bring that vision to reality. And you said it's complex, but it's also pretty simple. But could you dive into maybe how you manage? Because I think when it comes to culture, there's a lot of things that you guys did well. There's a lot of things you did well to build and maintain and reinforce the culture there. How do you manage all that as a coach?
So I would say a couple things because, I said a few minutes ago, I've really been big. I just am a really strong believer in culture and the power of a really incredible culture and just the ceiling being higher. And so I define culture as disciplined attitude and action done out of desire to align. That doesn't have to be everybody's definition, and realize it's not the only one, but that's how I define culture. But I think it's an interesting definition. Disciplined attitude and action done out of keyword desire to align. So for that reason, I believe a couple things. I believe in want to, right? Desire to align. I want to align. I want to be a part of this. That is foundational for me. And so, not to get into it, but I'm not a rulesy coach. I essentially don't have rules because to me, rules are have to. Culture is want to. And I believe they're mutually exclusive. They can't coexist because have to, in my mind, always kills or at least dulls want to. Okay. So that's a little bit of a basis for me. And that was the basis when I started at Messiah, when I started as a head coach. I wanted to inspire. I wanted to reach for hearts. And most of all, I wanted that to play out in a group that wanted to be a part of this. Okay. So not to kill you with a list, but I think I can give you a quick list of 6 or 7 steps that I feel are absolutely critical in the formation of culture. The first one is a simple and compelling vision. And that's why I started in answering the last question. I'm like, for me, it has to start with vision. If you don't have a simple, compelling vision that grabs people, right? That's what compelling means. And that is simple and just kind of knocks you over, i.e. best place in the country to play college soccer, Camelot in a soccer program. I mean, it could be lots of things, obviously. But if you don't have a vision like that and it's only winning, it's only the bottom line, then you turn into a manager. That's management. That's not leadership. No vision, no leadership even possible. So it starts there. But secondly, and I think this is really important, and I don't hear it talked about a lot. I talk all the time about what I call preparing the soil. To me, that's the second step in culture creation. So preparing the soil to me means this. It means that I am going to over communicate at every opportunity the reality and the pragmatic fallings out of my vision. That happens with a team that I'm with day to day, but it also happens in the recruiting process. So I'm like super open and transparent in the recruiting process. And I tell people very directly, I care about two things. I want to be the absolute best. I want to be perennial national champions. So we're daring to have that goal. We believe we can do it. I also want the 4-year college soccer experience. And this is where it's situational. And so coaches or anybody listening have to, of course, apply this to their situation. But I want the 4-year college soccer experience of playing for me to be absolutely life impacting on the basis of personal growth, leadership development, relationships, and team chemistry. Now, for a wide-eyed kid who's 17 or whatever, who's looking at college soccer and just thinking soccer, soccer, soccer. I mean, look, the soccer is important to me too. Obviously, that's what we're doing. But I don't want him to overlook this other stuff and be like, yeah, personal growth. Okay, I got it. That's cool. I over communicate it, right? I'm like, no, you don't understand. We're serious about it. I'm serious about it. I'm super intentional. This isn't lip service. This isn't just coach talk. This isn't just what somebody's supposed to say in the recruiting process. I will sit you down. I will open your mouth. I will shove my philosophy down your throat. I will then close your mouth and make you swallow. Not in a negative way, but you decide, is this good stuff? Work hard, dare greatly, separate act from feel. Are my values good stuff that you really would want to pursue? And I'm going to be intentional about it or not. And so, that makes a kid just think, and I'll do that over and over again, so that by the time that a kid signs up to come play for me, the soil is prepared. I hope that makes sense. There are no surprises. Like, he knows what he's getting into and he's excited about it. He knows I'm serious about it. It just makes everything so much easier. I don't want to pull people's ear on this stuff, right? So that's tough. I mean, as a coach, like, you got to balance a willing audience and kid and person with talent and players you want, et cetera. So yeah, those are the first two things. After that, I think it's critical to teach the vision very well, like almost classroom, like sit people down, like, what's your vision? Teach it, explain it. It's critical that you model it impeccably. It's critical that you integrate your visions, right? So how many organizations, coaches, teams, whatever, have a list of core values or signs on the wall, but they remain just that, right? They never really get integrated. And we don't really understand as an organization how these things walk and talk, live and breathe, that sort of thing. And so as a result of that, that's almost cancerous to an organization. We've got these core values. Nobody really cares. They're not relevant. So, it's almost like finding teachable moments, right, for core values. And you have to be super intentional about that. And so, I think the last two steps for me are, and this is a tough one, number 6, I think we're on, is you need to confront disconnect. And I think leadership struggles with that because confrontation is unpleasant, hard, and can be done wrong. And when you do it wrong, then you screw things up in a different way, and that's hard. And so, that's where I see leadership as an art form. And, I don't know if it takes a master conductor or whatever, but it's relational. You've got to meet people where they are and work with them and deal with them. And, none of my players have ever been perfect, and I'm way far from perfect. And I have to apologize to my team all the time, but I work hard at these things. And so, if we're able then to relationally confront disconnect and explain to people how we or they or I might have drifted from where we should be, the last step is, repeat times 10,000, because you can't do this once. It just never ends. And so I think that's the way I've looked at creation of culture. But I think running through it is just hopefully an honesty and a transparency and a relationalism that I think is irreplaceable, regardless of your or my personality or style of leadership or whatever it happens to be.
I appreciate that. I want to come back to something that you mentioned right at the opener there when you were talking about your disclaimer with the book. And that is, in your experience, you felt like the program went from being a good program to a great program. And I wonder, what was the difference? what were changes that, or, an approach or what have you that made the next step possible?
So kind of the three umbrella concepts for me that make a great culture possible are number one, this idea of a vision. Okay, so I've spoken about that. Number two, I'm a big servant leadership guy. I believe that servant leadership is not a leadership style, and many people disagree with me, and so that's fine. I'm just telling you what I believe. I believe that servant leadership is the very essence, the very heart of leadership, and that regardless of your coaching, leadership, personality, whether you're brash and authoritative or like super relational or somewhere in between, or whatever it happens to be, I believe there has to be a servanthood in that. Okay, a team first and others first orientation, that the leader serves his or her people, not the other way around. And as much as that sounds like it might make sense, it's done poorly too often. And we enter the realm of authority where I've just got position or title that gives me power or control, and I use that to my advantage. I believe that true leadership needs to use that for the advantage of the group, not the person in charge. And I have a point or a reason, hopefully, for bringing this up. The key thing for me, and the answer to your question, is my third thing. And that is, I'm a huge believer in what I call intentionality. I call intentionality the tool of leadership. And tools are important. It is the thing that helps you or enables you to execute the vision or not. And here's why I bring those three up. My college coach, now remember, he was more than my college coach. I played for him for 4 years. I assisted him in one capacity and another for 12. 16 years we spent working together pretty closely. Great, fine gentleman, great coach, huge influence on me, second only to my father, a really good coaching story. I learned so much from him. But I would also say this, and this is the direct answer to your question. He had a great vision. It's not that he didn't have vision. He had a wonderful vision. He articulated it well. He modeled it well, this sort of thing. He was also a true servant leader. None of us who ever played for him would ever say otherwise. So he had the first two bits right. And yet we still had dysfunction. We still had what I call drift from the vision, which I define drift as the human tendency toward ease or comfort. Okay. We still had drama. We still had ego. We still had cliques, all these things that hurt a team, a group, an organization, or culture. So that begs the question, well, what's up with that? I mean, this guy had a great vision. He was a great role model, and he was a true servant leader, wonderful, strong man who had a great vision, and we still had all these things. And so I think it took me, I think I reacted on it right away when I became head coach, but it took me a while to sort of formulate it in my mind and understand how to articulate it. I honestly think it was an intentionality issue. It's not even that he was afraid to confront, but, I think he counted on being a good example, and that was enough. And at some point, I guess in my mind, I said, you know what, if I really want things the way I want them, it's not enough. I need to be intentional. I need to cross T's, dot I's, make sure that I'm confronting drift, disconnect, anything I don't like. So, I'm intentional about everything. I mean, clickiness is a big thing for me. I mean, every group I've ever walked into has been clicky. I just feel like it's a tendency, right? You got the cool kids, the not cool kids, the seniors, the freshmen, the starters, the reserves, this group, that group. It's human nature. It's normal. I mean, people form these small little groups in the team, but for me, that hurts culture and it hurts team. So I'm extremely anti-click. And there's any number of tiny little things, but I think are very important, that I do to try to make sure that clickiness is not any sort of real part of our team, and that actually happens. And I think the change was down to that. It was down to those three things: vision, servanthood, and intentionality. And we made happen what we wanted it to look like. None of those things ensure results, but they give us a chance for a great culture, which is going to affect results.
Yeah, that intentionality piece is so important, right? I mean, so many coaches that we work with, and JP, and my own experiences in coaching for many years, have had the values on the wall and then don't explain what they're like. They don't get the buy-in from the players. They don't, we've made a lot of mistakes along those lines. And as you were talking about that, there's a quote that comes out in the book a number of times that Zigarelli attributes to you here, where he says, if you don't like what's happening on your team, it's your fault,
Right.
referring to the coach. And there's that sense of just radical ownership. I think you keep talking about human nature for a coach. It's easy for us to sit back and say, well, when these seniors are gone, or if it wasn't for these kids and their parents or whatever it might be, it's easy to blame and feel like we're victims of things that aren't going our way. You want to speak a little bit just to coaches of what you mean with that phrase? If you don't like what's happening on your team, it's your fault.
So funny how these things come to be. To be totally honest, strangest thing in the world. I was maybe in college as a college student, and for some reason, so Forbes magazine, pretty sure it was Forbes magazine, and I was not that serious of a student. I said I was a business major, that I'm sitting around reading Forbes magazines all the time, but I've always loved quotes. And Forbes magazine, at least used to, I have no idea anymore, used to have like 2 pages of quotes in the back of every magazine issue. I just always have loved quotes, and they inspire me, and I think they're cool. And so I would always look at the quotes in the back of a Forbes magazine. And one of them was this, and people have to take this with a grain of salt. This is terribly unpolitically correct these days. And was never meant literally. But this really impacted me. The quote was this. I have no idea who said it. It might've been JP Forbes himself. He said, if the student misbehaves, why not whip the teacher? And it struck me. Everything you just said was birthed in me right there. I don't know why. It just made sense. I'm like, you know what? Right. I mean, the teacher's responsible. I just thought it was different thinking, and I loved the quote, and it just always stuck with me in the back of my head. And so it's always been a core belief of mine, not to make excuses, not to complain. And those are a couple of our core values, but you combine that then with the quote that I just mentioned. I just have a deep-seated belief that I can affect things. And so if something happens, then it's on me ultimately. And I just think that's an important foundation to start from. And it's a little bit JP's first question. This is complicated, and it's not complicated. I think if you have some bases right and you're willing to stand for them, it becomes a little less complicated quickly, if that makes sense.
So that's it for today's episode. We're going to be back in our next episode with a discussion going a little more in depth on the nuts and bolts of how Dave, Brandt, and the other coaches operated as leaders. For now, I'd encourage you to check out The Messiah Method. It's an incredible book. And I have to admit, I'm a little embarrassed because I lived in Mechanicsburg from 2017 to 2019, just 10 minutes away from Messiah, and never knew about their soccer program. But luckily for all of us, we're able to still learn about them now. I hope you found this episode valuable. If you did, please be sure to share it.